So we're speaking with Kathryn Rose, who is the author of CAMELOT Burning, a young adult fantasy that releases May 8th from Flux. So this is fantasy, but perhaps not fantasy in the usual vein. This is Arthurian punk, which is incredibly intriguing. Kathryn, tell me about the world that you have created in CAMELOT Burning.
Well, in creating it, I wanted to keep a lot of the familiarity about Camelot in the story. I didn't want it to be 100%, revamped with, my own input and, steampunk elements. I wanted it to be familiar, and I had gotten early feedback from other people who thought that it would be best to make the world subtle in how it's different. So you have the castle and you have the medieval flair and the medieval world, but you have quiet elements of what would be, more of a steampunk world in the background, but also in the forefront, especially in the plot. A lot of the way that the kingdom works is run on what we call in my book the mechanical arts, and you see it a little more in the second book, but in the first book you have a lot of the kingdoms. They'll use the mechanical arts, the steampunk elements for practicality, for industry, or for entertainment and amusement. And Camelot sees it as a way to make their kingdom more practical and strong, and they use it in the weaponry as well.
So that sounds fairly involved, and it sounds incredibly unique, but also involved. So what was your process for your world building for your novel? Did you do research? Are there sort of specific resources you went to or that you go to when you're approaching world building?
Yeah, well, I read a lot of steampunk just to kind of get the idea of the conventions and how they're used and what I liked about it and what could work in my book versus what wouldn't work with the plot. And I think I kind of went a little backwards as well, because I would look at the canonical elements of Camelot and Arthurian legend in itself and see what I could reinvent, I guess, or change in a way that would be familiar but very different. Like Excalibur, for example, like it would be, you can recognize it as Excalibur, but it has a steampunk twist. I would look at Arthurian lore as well, and the Once and Future King, and Lamort Arthur, and Miss of Babylon, and these other awesome sources for Arthurian lore, and kind of put them together and see how they could work and how they could help move the plot forward.
That sounds great. It sounds so fascinating. Now, your main character is Vivian, and she is lady in waiting to Guinevere, and it sounds like perhaps she's the gracious confidant or the domestic companion, but also she's obviously smart and looking for adventure. She hangs out with Merlin, right? I mean, she's smart. She can cast spells and create machines. Is that sort of what she's?
She doesn't cast spells. Magic is outlawed in Camelot. But Merlin is a former sorcerer in this, and now he's an inventor. He embraces the mechanical arts, and Vivian is his apprentice. He saw in her, when she was quite young, the ability to build and create and see new things in the things already around her. So she's very smart, and she's very logical, and she has a knack for building. But she also has, I think she does have a warm side to her, and I think her friendship with Guinevere brings that out.
Do you think you wrote a character that you were looking for when you read fantasy as a child? Like, do you think that fantasy needs more characters like Vivian, female characters like Vivian?
Absolutely. I think that in the fantasy books I read growing up, there aren't a lot of female characters in a lot of older fantasy books. One thing that I want to make clear off the bat is Vivian's very smart, and I think she's a strong character, and I think she's interesting and flawed, but and I've said this before in another interview, she's not a kick-ass warrior. She's quite useless in battle. And that I think that was important to me, because I didn't want to make her this automatic hero or heroine in her story. She has her own strengths, and she relies upon other characters for their strengths in order to work towards something that would take care of everyone, you know? It was really important to me to have her be intelligent and be a leader in her own respect, but I didn't want her to pick up a sword the first time and, you know, be naturally good at it. I didn't think that would be very realistic, especially with, you know, her history. She's a lady in waiting to Guinevere. She would have no reason to pick up a sword, really.
Right.
So I wanted to keep that in there, and then, you know, see how she grows and see her outside of her comfort zone.
Right. What books do you feel have inspired your writing? Maybe not Camelot Burning in particular, but just your writing in general.
The first book I read that really made me think, oh my gosh, I would love to be able to create that, was Ray Bradbury. He wrote Something Wicked This Way Comes. That was a book I'd read in the 10th grade. It's such a lush world that he creates in that book, and so interesting and so detailed, and so a lot of unanswered questions that I really liked. And John Wyndham, The Chrysalids, which I also read in the 10th grade, actually. And that book was incredible in terms of its world building, I think. Kind of hit close to home a bit, because I think it was set in eastern Canada, so we had a fun time, you know, making spooky jokes about it.
You and I must be the same age, because I read that book in grade 10 also. It must have been part of the Canadian curriculum or something like this. Yeah, that's a great book. So you are working on the sequel now?
I am.
And when is the sequel due to be released in relation to the first book?
The release date is not final yet, but it'll probably be next spring.
We have to wait a whole year, but I guess that's pretty normal. So let's hear a little bit of Camelot Burning. What part are you going to read for us?
I'm going to read the first page, so you can get a taste of who Vivian is and where the story's going to go.
When a mechanical falcon takes flight from Merlin's tower, it means the sorcerer is bored or drunk on absinthe. I wonder if anyone else in Camelot stargazes enough to know this. The scarlet curtains of Merlin's window catch on the bird's feathers when the absinthe is especially potent, and today is no different. An arm stretches the falcon out the window. From the height of Lady Guinevere's bedchambers, the tattooed words of magic on Merlin's forearm aren't visible, but I know such words are there, faded and old from his travels to the Holy Land before sorcery was purged in favor of the mechanical arts, and, with it, his addiction. The back of his hand flicks the machine into the air. I wait for the sorcerer to reveal himself, a wind-up controller in hand with copper wires attached to the falcon's artificial brain. Instead, a wire-free bird plummets to the ground, and my heart stops. No, I breathe, careful not to speak too loudly in case my lady would hear. The mechanical falcon will be smashed to bits. Weeks of construction for nothing. My eyes squeeze shut and I wait for the explosion of cogs, copper and brass on cobblestone. But then, extend, Merlin calls, his voice demanding obedience. The shining wings crack, one plate at a time, to a span of nearly 3 feet. They catch the breeze and spread across the sky, steering upward without any wires. My eyebrows lift, my lips part. This is new.